On paper, this watch looks amazing. You get a brand with a lot of heritage, an attractive design, a true GMT movement with 70 hours of power reserve, precious metal and stainless steel case, 200 meters of water resistance, all of that for $5,000. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? But as we all know too well, many watches that have great specs on paper are not the same watches that we want to put in our collections. So what about this new Tudor Gmt Root Beer? Is it just a specs list, or is there more to its story? To tell a full story of this watch, we briefly have to talk about its cousin, a Pepsi GMT that came out a few years ago. That watch has an in-house automatic GMT movement caliber MT5652 with 70 hours of power reserve, which this root beer also has. That watch introduced a two-tone bidirectional GMT bezel, which this watch also has. In fact, there are only two real differences between this root beer and its cousin Pepsi. The differences being the colors combination and some of the materials used. Everything else about the two models is pretty much interchangeable. That in itself is not really a bad thing. I just did a review of Omega Seamaster 300 in green, and Omega there did exactly the same thing with the Seamaster. They used an existing model, just made it in a new color variation. It's a very common thing to do in watch industry. Arguably, Tudor has done more to differentiate this GMT to its stainless steel cousin. With that being said, I can't help but feel that Tudor could have done a little bit more with this release. But before I talk about the negatives and the things that could have been done with this watch, let's touch on some positives because there are quite a few positives. Let's talk about the case finishes. They are executed really well. We have a satin finish on top of the lugs with a high polish finish on the sides of the case. The chamfered edges look great. It's basically exactly what a luxury watch in this price category should look and feel like. And there are no doubts about it, this is a luxury watch. I've seen some articles talking about this watch as a tool piece, and I don't think that's entirely accurate. Having a gold crown and a gold bezel doesn't exactly scream rugged tool watch to me. That's not to say that it's not a capable watch. It is. It has 200 meters of water resistance, a screw-down crown, and a bidirectional tactile feeling GMT bezel. It probably can survive whatever you will throw at it. But the difference is you don't buy this watch for its ruggedness. You buy it because of its looks. The looks come first, the toughness and the functionality are a nice bonus. And there's nothing wrong with that. I own a two-tone Submariner and I have no delusions thinking that I bought that watch for diving. If I wanted a tool watch, I would have bought a stainless steel Submariner. I like the look of a two-tone Submariner, so I bought it because of its looks first. And having the capabilities of the Submariner are just a nice bonus, just in case factor, so to speak. Actually, this would be a great time to put the two watches side by side and to show you the color differences between them. Because in my opinion, Tudor looks more rose gold than yellow gold. And that's all due to its bezel coloring. It's a neat trick. I quite like that about this Tudor. I think they really nailed the colors on its bezel. It makes the watch feel a little bit softer, a bit more retro. Another thing that I appreciate about this Tudor's design is the dial. It has gold accents all around the dial, gold indexes, a gold set of hands with that iconic snowflake shape, and the date at the 3 o'clock position. Everything is well balanced, it's sharp, and it fits together. Completing the vintage feel of the watch is the domed sapphire crystal. It creates great distortion angles, and once again, it makes the watch feel a bit softer. That's the best way I can describe it. The loom on this GMT is also great. It's as strong as the loom on Tudor's diver models, the only difference being the fact that there is no loom pip on the bezel because it doesn't need it it's a GMT and not a diver. One of the big advantages that this GMT has over its rivals is a true GMT movement. The caliber MT5652 is a true GMT movement with a local jumping hand, and you also get 70 hours of power reserve. When this movement was first released, there were some kinks to be worked out, but at this point, a few years later, it's a super solid movement, and it even comes with 5-year warranty. This Root Beer GMT has been released alongside with the new Tudor Black Bay Pro. Both watches hit home with the watch community. Since their release a few months ago, the Root Beer has been popping up here and there. A few people I know bought one, including my close friend who lent me this exact watch for this video. Tudor Black Bay Pro, on the other hand, has been difficult to come by. There aren't as many videos of it, not as many hands-on reviews, and I actually don't even know anyone who bought one. I think I know the reason for this, and the reason also sort of ties into my negatives of this watch. The reason why Tudor Black Bay Pro is hard to find is because Tudor had to create a whole new case for that watch, which of course is more difficult. It takes longer to produce and delays production and distribution of those watches, as opposed to this Root Beer GMT, which shares a lot of its components with the Pepsi GMT and thus makes it much easier and quicker to produce / distribute to customers. That in itself is not a bad thing. A lot of companies do this all the time, as I mentioned earlier. At the same time, by using the same components as the Pepsi, Tudor has missed an opportunity to fix some of the negatives that I found when I reviewed Pepsi back a couple of years ago. One of the biggest negatives with the Pepsi GMT is, of course, its thickness, and this watch here has that same issue. The watch is 14.5 millimeters thick. Here it is on my 7.5 inches wrist. 41 millimeter diameter on the sports watch is sort of your mid-size case. On my size of a wrist, it looks great. And this watch, for the most part, is comfortable. It has no awkward angles, no pressure points, except for its thickness, which makes the watch a little bit too top heavy. It also makes it wear larger than most 41 millimeter watches, once again because of that thickness. Now, if you take that number, 14.5 millimeters thickness, out of context, it's not overly thick. Quite a few watches are 14.5 millimeters thick. But for whatever reason, on these Black Bay cases, 14.5 millimeters just looks and feels thick. There's something about this case architecture that really emphasizes the thickness of the watch. So even shaving a millimeter off of this would be great. 13.5 millimeters would be fantastic. But I get it, maybe it's not a fair criticism. Shaving off a millimeter off of the thickness of the watch is pretty difficult. It might also take redesigning the movement of the watch, and that might not be possible at this stage. But they could have at least addressed another issue that I found with the Pepsi back in the day, and it's the clasp on the watch. The watch has the same clasp as the Pepsi. This clasp was a bit outdated 3 or 4 years ago when that watch came out, and it's even more outdated now. It's a simple scissor clasp with 3 micro adjustments, and in my opinion, no, it doesn't look old school and charming. It just looks outdated and too simple. I think a watch like this deserves a better quality clasp. But okay, fine, maybe they didn't want to spend more resources on re-engineering the clasp, because again, that's expensive, maybe would bring up the price of the watch a little bit too high. But at least they could have done a clasp in two-tone to match the bracelet. Here's a two-tone clasp of my vintage Rolex Submariner to give you an idea what I'm talking about. As you can see, the gold carries through the clasp and makes the watch look as a more cohesive unit. On the Tudor, it breaks up the symmetry and it looks out of place. I really dislike how this clasp looks on a two-tone bracelet. The rest of the bracelet itself is great. You have a first hinged link, which makes the watch a true 50 millimeters from one lock to another. It doesn't have that first protruding link, which would annoy quite a few people, especially guys with a smaller wrist. The bracelet is made up of solid links with solid end links. Now they're not full gold through and through, not at this price point. What you get is gold wrap links on the bracelet, which means you can still polish them out a few times before you wear out the gold. It also has those controversial 4 rivets and screws for adjustments, just like other Tudor Black Bay models. So overall, the watch offers great value for money. I think there's nothing that the competition has on the market right now that even touches what this watch offers. I also think that my negatives with the watch are fair, and Tudor could have done something to address these negatives. They just chose not to do it for this version of the watch. I hope they address them for the future. If you're looking for a watch like this and you don't mind the thickness, I think you'll be very happy with choosing this watch. I appreciate you watching this video all the way until the end. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We release new videos every week. And leave a comment in a comment section below. Let me know what you think about this Tudor Gmt Root Beer. Would you buy one? Are you on a waiting list? Leave your thoughts below. I always enjoy reading your comments. Thanks for watching this one, and we'll see you next time. Bye.